Don't worry, I'll keep you safe.
But it's so dangerous out here.
We'll face it together.
The storm had rolled across the Wyoming plains with a fury that seemed personal, as though the sky itself had chosen to wage war on the lonely stretch of earth below. Rain slammed against the rusted tin roof of the weathered ranch house like fists demanding entry, and lightning split the horizon into jagged white scars. Inside the barn, horses shifted restlessly, sensing the electricity clawing through the air. Cole Harlan stood in the open doorway, hat pulled low, broad shoulders framed by flashes of lightning. He had lived through dozens of storms out here, but tonight felt different. The wind carried a sound beneath its howl, something uneven, something fragile like a cry trying to survive the roar of the world. Cole's hand tightened around the wooden beam beside him as he listened again. Years of ranch life had trained his instincts to detect trouble before it arrived. He stepped out into the downpour without hesitation, boots sinking into the mud as rain soaked his flannel shirt in seconds. The cry came again, faint but unmistakable. It drifted from beyond the cattle fence, near the dirt road that rarely saw travelers anymore. Cole moved quickly, grabbing a lantern from its hook and striding toward the sound. His jaw clenched with a growing sense of dread. Out here, people didn't wander during storms unless they were desperate or running from something far worse than weather. The beam of the lantern cut through sheets of rain as Cole reached the broken stretch of fence. Along the roadside, thunder rolled overhead, shaking the ground beneath his boots, and for a moment he saw nothing but darkness and swirling dust. Then lightning exploded across the sky, and the world froze in white brilliance. That was when he saw her. She lay crumpled beside the ditch, half submerged in mud, her dress torn and clinging to her like a second skin soaked in rain and blood. Cole's heart slammed against his ribs as he rushed forward. Dropping to one knee beside her, she couldn't have been older than 25. Her face was swollen, with bruises blooming in dark shades of purple and blue. When I nearly shut, cuts marked her arms, and her bare feet were scraped raw as if she had run miles across gravel. She tried to push herself up when she sensed his presence, but her body failed her, collapsing back into the mud with a weak gasp. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but only a broken whisper escaped, drowned by the storm. Cole removed his hat and placed it gently over her chest to shield her face from the rain. He had seen injuries before: bar fights in town, ranch accidents, even the aftermath of a cattle stampede, but this was cruelty carved into human flesh. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders and another under her knees, lifting her carefully. She winced despite being barely conscious, her fingers gripping his shirt as if clinging to the last solid thing in a collapsing world. Cole looked down at her trembling form, his voice low and steady despite the fury rising inside him. "No one will hurt you again," he said, the promise leaving his mouth before he even realized he had spoken it aloud. The woman stirred weakly in his arms as he carried her toward the ranch house, each step deliberate against the sucking mud. The storm raged around them, but Cole moved with the calm certainty of a man who had made a decision that would change everything. As he pushed open the ranch house door with his shoulder, warm lamplight spilled across the wooden floor, illuminating the dust particles floating like ghosts in the air. He laid her gently on the worn leather couch beside the fireplace and quickly stoked the flames until the room glowed with heat. Water dripped from his clothes onto the floor as he grabbed blankets from the hallway chest and wrapped them around her shaking body. Up close, the damage became even clearer. Finger-shaped bruises circled her wrists. A deep cut marked her temple. Her breathing came in shallow bursts, each one sounding like it cost her strength she didn't have left. Cole swallowed hard, forcing his hands to remain steady as he fetched the first aid kit from the kitchen cabinet. He cleaned her wounds carefully, his movements surprisingly gentle for a man known in town for his rugged silence and intimidating stature. Every flinch she made ignited a colder, sharper anger in him, but he buried it beneath focus when he pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. Her remaining open eye fluttered slightly, revealing a glimpse of fear so deep it looked permanent. Cole leaned closer, his voice softer now, almost unfamiliar to his own ears. "You're safe here," he murmured. Outside, thunder cracked like a gunshot, rattling the windows, But inside the ranch house, the fire crackled steadily, and for the first time that night, the storm seemed to lose a fraction of its power. The fire snapped and hissed as trapped rainwater evaporated from the logs, sending thin curls of steam into the air. Cole knelt beside the couch, carefully rinsing the blood from the woman's arms with warm water from a chipped porcelain bowl. Her skin was ice cold despite the thick blankets wrapped around her. He worked methodically, his large hands surprisingly precise as he disinfected each cut years ago, when his younger sister had broken her arm falling from a horse. He had learned how to treat wounds while waiting hours for a doctor to arrive. The memory pressed against his chest like a dull ache he had learned to live with. He forced it aside, focusing on the fragile stranger lying in front of him. She stirred again, her breath catching as pain rippled through her body. Her lips parted, forming broken fragments of words that refused to fully emerge. Cole leaned closer, trying to catch the whisper beneath her trembling breaths, but all he could make out was a single word repeated faintly, like a prayer she no longer believed would be answered. Please. The word barely existed, dissolving into the air before it could become whole. Cole set the bowl aside and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, noticing how tightly her hands clutched the fabric as if expecting it to be torn away. He had seen fear in animals caught in barbed wire or trapped in flash floods, but this was deeper, older, carved into her bones. Whoever had done this hadn't just hurt her body, they had shattered her sense of safety in the world itself. Outside, the storm began to shift, its furious roar softening into steady rainfall. The ranch house creaked with the wind's final protests, but inside, the warmth grew stronger. Cole stood and walked to the stove, filling a kettle with water and placing it over the flame. His mind churned with questions he had no answers to. Who was she? Where had she come from? And most importantly, who had hurt her badly enough that she would run barefoot across miles of storm-battered prairie? He clenched his jaw as he remembered the bruises circling her wrists. Those weren't random injuries, those were marks left by hands determined to control, to cage, to break. The kettle began to whistle softly, pulling him from his thoughts. He poured hot water into a mug, mixing in honey and a small splash of whiskey, an old remedy his father had used for shock and cold exposure. As he returned to the couch, her eye fluttered open again, this time lingering slightly longer. Fear flooded her gaze the moment she saw him, and she instinctively tried to pull away, her body tensing despite her obvious weakness. Cole immediately stepped back, lowering himself into a chair across from her to create distance. He removed his head again and placed it on the table beside him, letting her see his face fully. His voice remained calm, steady, grounded like the earth itself. You're safe, he repeated, holding the mug out but not forcing it closer. You don't have to talk. You don't have to explain. Just drink if you can. She stared at him for several long seconds, her breathing shallow and uneven. Slowly, her trembling fingers reached out, hesitating midway as if expecting him to grab her wrist. When he didn't move, she completed the motion, wrapping both hands around the mug as though it were the only warmth left in existence. She tried to lift it but winced, her arms shaking violently. Without speaking, Cole moved closer again, carefully supporting the mug while allowing her to remain in control. She took a small sip, coughing slightly as the warmth spread down her throat. Tears welled in her eye, not dramatic or loud, just silent streams slipping into her tangled hair. Cole looked away, giving her privacy even within the same room. The ranch had been painfully quiet since his father passed 3 winters ago. Most days, the only sounds were cattle calls and the wind dragging across the plains. Now the silence felt different, filled with fragile life struggling to rebuild itself piece by piece. After a few more sips, the woman's body relaxed slightly into the cushions, exhaustion pulling her deeper into the blankets. Her voice finally emerged. Ron cracked like dry earth after drought. Where am I? Cole leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Harland Ranch, he answered simply, about 20 miles from the nearest town. Her brow furrowed as if she were trying to place the name within memories clouded by pain. He'll find me, she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Cole's expression hardened, though his tone stayed calm. "Not out here," he said firmly. The certainty in his voice wasn't arrogance, it was promise shaped by years of defending land, livestock, and family from anything that threatened them. She studied his face, searching for doubt, but found none. Slowly, her eye closed again, her grip on the mug loosening as exhaustion finally dragged her into unconsciousness. Cole gently removed the mug from her hands and adjusted the blankets. Once more, he remained seated beside the couch long after she fell asleep, listening to the rain fade into a distant memory while an unfamiliar but unshakable sense of responsibility settled heavily onto his shoulders. The storm had completely passed by dawn, leaving the prairie washed clean beneath a pale golden sunrise. Cole stepped out onto the porch, stretching his stiff muscles as cool morning air filled his lungs. The land stretched endlessly before him, rolling hills glistening with dew like scattered diamonds across the grass. Normally, mornings like this brought him peace, a reminder that no matter how violent the night had been, the world always found a way to begin again. But today, his thoughts remained anchored to the fragile woman sleeping inside his home. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, feeling the rough stubble that had grown overnight. Responsibility wasn't something he avoided. Ranch life demanded it every day. Yet this felt different. Livestock and land were predictable. People were storms that rarely followed patterns. He walked toward the barn, feeding the horses and checking the fences automatically, his mind replaying the fear he had seen in her eyes. It wasn't just fear of pain, it was fear of being owned. The realization settled heavily in his chest, igniting a protective anger he hadn't felt in years. By the time he finished morning chores, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the ranch house windows. He wiped his hands on his jeans and headed back inside, bracing himself for whatever the day might reveal. The ranch house smelled faintly of medicinal ointment and would smoke when he entered. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but the room remained warm. He moved quietly toward the couch, expecting to find her still asleep. Instead, he froze when he saw her sitting upright, clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Panic flashed across her face the moment she noticed him, her gaze darting toward the door as if calculating escape routes. Cole immediately raised both hands slightly, keeping his distance again. "You're all right," he said gently. "You passed out last night. Needed rest." She stared at him, her breathing quick but controlled, like someone forcing themselves to remain calm through sheer willpower. Up close in daylight, the bruises looked even worse, darkened and swollen against her pale skin. Her voice came out hoarse but steadier than before. "Why? Help me." The question caught him off guard, not because he didn't have an answer, but because she sounded genuinely confused by the concept. He leaned against the wooden table, crossing his arms loosely. "Because you needed help," he replied simply. She shook her head slightly, as if the answer didn't fit into her understanding of the world. "People don't just help." Cole studied her carefully, realizing how deeply that belief must have been carved into her. He walked to the kitchen counter and poured a glass of water, placing it within her reach before stepping back again. "Some do," he said quietly. The room fell into silence, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. After a moment, she reached for the glass, her hands trembling less than before. She drank slowly, her eyes never fully leaving him, still measuring, still searching for danger hidden behind kindness. Minutes passed before she spoke again. "My name is Eliza," she said, the words fragile but determined. Cole nodded once. "Cole." She lowered her gaze to her hands, tracing the bruises along her wrists absent-mindedly. "If he comes here, he won't stop," she whispered. Cole's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm as granite. "Then he won't leave." The quiet confidence in his tone sent a flicker of confusion across her face, followed by something softer, something that looked dangerously close to hope. She looked toward the window, watching sunlight spill across the prairie as if seeing open land for the first time, without bars or locked doors framing it. Her shoulders slowly relaxed against the couch, exhaustion still clinging to her movements. But a tiny piece of the rigid fear inside her seemed to loosen. Cole turned toward the stove, beginning to cook breakfast with the steady rhythm of someone grounding himself through routine. The smell of frying eggs and fresh coffee filled the house, weaving comfort into the air. Behind him, Eliza watched silently, her fingers tightening around the blanket as unfamiliar warmth settled into her chest. She didn't know if safety was real. She didn't know if promises could survive the world she had escaped. But as she watched the cowboy moving quietly through the kitchen, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. For the first time since running into the storm, she allowed herself to believe she might live long enough to see another sunrise. The morning settled into a fragile calm that felt almost unnatural after the violence of the previous night. Sunlight stretched across the prairie in long golden ribbons, slipping through the ranch house windows and warming the wooden floors. Cole moved through the kitchen with steady, practiced motions, flipping eggs in a cast iron skillet while the coffee pot bubbled softly beside him. The normal rhythm of ranch life usually centered him, but today his awareness remained fixed on the quiet figure sitting on the couch behind him. Eliza held the blanket around her shoulders, like armor, her posture still stiff, as if every muscle in her body expected danger to arrive. Without warning, she watched him carefully, her gaze following each movement as though she were memorizing his habits, measuring whether his kindness could be trusted or if it was simply another mask waiting to fall. The smell of food filled the air, rich and grounding, and her stomach tightened painfully in response. Hunger had been a constant companion during the days she had spent running, hiding, surviving on fear and adrenaline alone. But accepting food felt like accepting safety. And safety was something she had learned came with invisible chains. Cole placed a plate of eggs, toast, and sliced apples on the small wooden table beside the couch before stepping back again. He avoided sudden movements, speaking only when necessary, allowing silence to become a language that reassured rather than threatened. "You need strength," he said quietly, nodding toward the plate. Eliza stared at the food for several seconds, her fingers tightening around the blanket. Memories flashed behind her eyes. Meals used as bargaining tools, hunger used as punishment, kindness used as bait. She swallowed hard, forcing her shaking hand to reach forward. The fork felt foreign in her grip, heavier than it should have been. She took a small bite, chewing slowly, her gaze flickering toward Cole as if expecting him to snatch the plate away. He simply leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee, giving her the space to exist without pressure. After another bite, then another, her breathing gradually slowed, and color began to return faintly to her cheeks. Cole watched carefully, noting every sign of strength returning to her fragile frame. He had learned long ago that survival wasn't just about healing wounds, it was about rebuilding trust. One quiet moment at a time. Outside, the ranch bustled with subtle life. Horses stamped their hooves in the barn, and cattle lowed softly. In distant fields, Cole eventually stepped out to handle morning chores, leaving Eliza alone in the house for the first time. The moment the door closed, silence wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket. Her eyes darted toward the windows, the doors, every corner of the room. Freedom felt overwhelming, like standing at the edge of an open cliff after years of living. In a locked cage, she forced herself to breathe, reminding her racing mind that she had made it through the storm, that she was still alive, that the cowboy had not harmed her. Slowly, she pushed the blanket aside and swung her feet onto the floor. Pain shot through her legs instantly, forcing a sharp gasp from her lips. The bruises along her ribs screamed with every breath. Still, she pressed her hands against the couch and tried to stand. Her knees buckled immediately, and she collapsed back down. Tears stinging her eyes from frustration more than pain, she clenched her jaw, refusing to cry out. Weakness had always been punished. Weakness had always been dangerous. She wiped her eyes quickly, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to storm in and remind her of that truth. But no one came. The ranch remained peaceful, quiet, patient, and for the first time in years, her struggle belonged only to her. Cole returned nearly an hour later, carrying fresh firewood in his arms. The moment he stepped inside, he noticed the subtle shift in Eliza's posture. She sat straighter, her expression guarded but determined, as if she had been fighting a private battle during his absence. He set the wood beside the fireplace and glanced toward her legs. Noticing the slight trembling she tried to hide, tried to stand, he asked gently. Eliza stiffened, surprised by how easily he had read her actions. She hesitated before nodding. Once, Cole crouched beside the fire, arranging the logs carefully before lighting them. He spoke without turning toward her, his tone calm and steady. Healing takes time. Rushing it only makes it worse. Eliza stared at the flames beginning to grow, their warmth spreading across the room. Time wasn't allowed before, she whispered. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Cole paused, his hand resting on the poker. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. Instead, he simply nodded, acknowledging her truth without forcing her to relive it. That silent respect settled something deep inside her chest, something brittle and cracked that hadn't been touched in years. Later that afternoon, Cole helped her move from the couch to a chair near the window. He supported her carefully, allowing her to control every step, never lifting her without permission. Each movement was slow and painful, but determination burned behind her bruised expression. When she finally settled into the chair, she stared out at the endless stretch of prairie. The land looked unreal, too vast, too open. It's quiet, she said softly. Cole leaned against the wall beside her. Most people think quiet is lonely, he replied. Out here, it means peace. Eliza studied the distant horizon, watching wind ripple through tall grass like waves across a green ocean. She had spent so long trapped within walls that the idea of peace felt almost suspicious. Yet something about the openness soothed her, like the land itself was offering her room to breathe again. As they sat in silence, the distant rumble of an approaching engine suddenly shattered the calm. Cole's posture changed instantly, every muscle tightening with alertness. Eliza's entire body froze, terror flooding her face as she gripped the chair arms so tightly her knuckles turned white. Cole stepped toward the window, his gaze narrowing as he spotted a dust cloud rising from the dirt road leading toward the ranch. The truck appeared slowly, its dark silhouette cutting through the golden prairie like a shadow that refused to fade. Cole's jaw clenched as instinct sharpened his focus. Visitors were rare out here, especially unannounced ones. He turned toward Eliza, noticing how her breathing had become rapid and shallow, panic swallowing her fragile composure. Stay here, he said firmly but gently. Eliza grabbed his sleeve before he could move away, her fingers trembling violently. If it's him, she whispered, her voice breaking completely. Cole placed his hand over hers, steady and warm. Then he made a mistake coming here, he replied quietly. The certainty in his voice grounded her just enough for her to release his sleeve. Cole grabbed his hat and stepped outside, closing the door behind him as the truck rolled to a stop near the barn. The engine shut off, leaving a heavy silence. Hanging in the air, a tall man stepped out, dust swirling around his boots. Cole recognized him instantly, Sheriff Dalton Reeves. Relief mixed with tension as Cole walked forward to greet him. Knowing the sheriff's presence could mean help or trouble Eliza might not be ready to face. Sheriff Reeves removed his sunglasses as he approached, his weathered face lined with concern. Heard you found someone out by the road last night, he said, his voice carrying the weight of small-town rumors traveling faster than wind across open land. Cole crossed his arms loosely, keeping his expression neutral. She needed help, he answered simply. Reeves studied him carefully before glancing toward the ranch house. Word reached town this morning. There's been talk of a missing woman matching her description. Name's Eliza Carter. Report came in from a man claiming she's his fiancée. Says she ran off during an argument. Cole felt a sharp, cold anger settle in his chest, but he kept his tone controlled. Does he got proof? Reeves hesitated slightly, adjusting his belt. He's got influence. Money too. Name's Victor Hale. The name hung in the air like a distant thunderclap. Cole's instinct screamed danger. You believe him? Cole asked. Reeves sighed heavily. I believe missing women rarely run barefoot through thunderstorms, unless something's real wrong. Cole nodded once, relief flickering briefly across his expression. Reeves lowered his voice. But if Hale files charges claiming you're hiding her, things could get complicated. I need to talk to her. Make sure she's here by choice, inside the ranch house. Eliza watched through the window, her entire body trembling as she saw the sheriff's badge glint in the sunlight. Authority had never meant protection in her world. Authority had meant contracts, signatures, and men who looked the other way while her life slowly turned into a cage. Her mind raced with memories of Victor Hale's calm, calculating voice promising consequences for disobedience. She clutched the blanket tightly around her shoulders, her eyes darting toward the back door as panic whispered escape once again. But her body remained rooted in place, torn between terror and the fragile trust she had begun building with the cowboy, who had carried her out of the storm. When the front door opened and Cole stepped inside, followed by Sheriff Reeves, her breathing nearly stopped. Reeves removed his hat respectfully, his expression softening as he saw her injuries clearly for the first time. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "I'm here to make sure you're safe." The word safe echoed painfully in her mind. She glanced toward Cole, searching his face for guidance. He didn't speak. He didn't step forward. He simply stood quietly, allowing her to choose her own voice. Eliza swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she gripped the chair. Fear clawed at her throat, threatening to silence her completely. Victor's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her of contracts signed under pressure, of threats whispered behind closed doors, of punishments delivered with terrifying calmness. She forced herself to breathe, focusing on the warmth of sunlight across her face, the smell of wood smoke lingering in the air, the steady presence of the man who had carried her to safety. Without asking for anything in return, her voice emerged, as a fragile whisper at first, then slowly gained strength. "I didn't run from an argument," she said, her gaze locking onto the sheriff's eyes. "I ran for my life." Silence swallowed the room. Reeves' expression hardened slightly, understanding settling across his features. Cole remained still, but his shoulders relaxed just enough to reveal relief he didn't allow himself to show openly. Eliza's hands stopped trembling as she continued, each word breaking chains she had carried for years. "And I'm not going back." The statement hung in the air like a declaration of war against the shadows chasing her across the prairie. Outside, the wind stirred the tall grass once more, whispering across the land like a promise that the storm had not truly passed. It had only changed direction. The declaration lingered in the ranch house like the echo of a gunshot, sharp and irreversible. Eliza's words seemed to shift the very air in the room, transforming fear into something heavier, something stronger. Sheriff Reeves remained silent for several seconds, studying her carefully, weighing the truth he saw in her bruises, in the tremor of her voice, in the quiet defiance burning behind her exhaustion. He finally nodded slowly, his weathered face tightening with resolve. "Then you won't be going back," he said, his voice firm but calm. Relief flickered across Eliza's expression, fragile but unmistakable. Cole exhaled quietly, tension easing slightly from his shoulders, though a deeper concern settled into his chest. He knew men like Victor Hale didn't accept losing control easily. They didn't retreat politely. They fought, manipulated, and destroyed anything that threatened their power. Reeves shifted his stance, placing his hat back onto his head. "But if Hale's as influential as folks say, he won't stop with words or legal threats. He'll come looking himself." The warning hung heavy between them. Cole crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "Let him," he replied simply. Reeves met his eyes, recognizing the quiet steel behind the cowboy's calm demeanor. "I figured you'd say that," he muttered. Later that afternoon, Reeves left after promising to file a protective report in town, though he admitted legal protection might move slower than danger itself. Once the sheriff's truck disappeared into the horizon, silence returned to the ranch, but it felt different now, charged, watchful, like the prairie itself was bracing for a coming storm. Cole stepped outside to reinforce the perimeter of the ranch, checking fences, securing barn doors, and ensuring every working rifle was cleaned and loaded. He hated the thought of violence touching his land again, but he hated the thought of Eliza being dragged back into captivity even more. Inside the house, Eliza sat by the window, watching him move across the yard with steady determination. The sight stirred conflicting emotions inside her. She had spent years believing she was alone, that survival meant submission or escape without destination. Now someone was preparing to fight for her safety without demanding anything in return. The concept felt overwhelming, almost frightening in its unfamiliarity. She pressed her fingers lightly against the bruises along her wrists, memories surfacing, of locked doors and whispered threats disguised as affection. Tears welled briefly but didn't fall. Instead, something strong arose within her, a quiet decision forming in the depths of her shattered confidence. When Cole returned inside, he found her standing beside the couch, gripping the armrest for balance. His eyes widened slightly, concern flashing across his face. "You shouldn't be standing alone yet," he said gently, stepping closer but not touching her. Eliza met his gaze, her voice steadier than he had ever heard it. "I can't stay weak," she replied. Cole studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Then you won't," he said. He moved closer, offering his arm for support. This time, she accepted without hesitation. Together, they took slow, painful steps across the room, each movement burning through her bruised ribs and aching muscles. Yet with every step, something inside her strengthened. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was learning how to stand again. The afternoon sunlight spilled across the floor, wrapping around them like a quiet witness to a fragile but powerful transformation beginning to take shape. The following days passed with cautious rhythm. Cole balanced ranch duties with helping Eliza rebuild her strength. Each morning, she practiced walking across the wooden floors with his support, gradually learning to trust her legs again. Bruises began to fade into yellow shadows beneath her skin. Though deeper scars remained hidden behind her eyes, Cole never pushed her to share her past, but pieces of it surfaced naturally in broken fragments during quiet moments. She spoke of Victor Hale's charm that had masked his control, of promises that slowly turned into commands, of isolation disguised as protection. Cole listened without interruption, his anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. The more he learned, the more determined he became to ensure Hale never touched her life again. Meanwhile, Sheriff Reeves visited regularly, updating them on Hale's escalating search. Hale had offered rewards, spread rumors claiming Eliza was unstable, and even attempted to file kidnapping charges against Cole, but Reeves quietly dismantled each claim, his loyalty grounded in the truth he had seen with his own eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the prairie in fiery orange, Eliza stood on the porch beside Cole, leaning lightly against the railing. Wind brushed through her hair, carrying the scent of open grass and distant rain. She watched cattle grazing peacefully across the rolling hills, her gaze thoughtful. "He used to say the world was dangerous without him," she said softly. Cole rested his elbows on the railing beside her. "Some men build cages and call them safety," he replied. She turned slightly toward him, studying his expression. "Why help me, truly?" The question held deeper weight now, no longer born from suspicion, but genuine curiosity. Cole remained silent for a moment, watching the horizon as memories stirred within him. "My sister married a man like Hale," he finally said quietly. Eliza's breath caught slightly. He convinced her she couldn't survive without him. By the time she realized she deserved better, it was too late. Pain flickered across Cole's face before he buried it beneath calm composure. "I couldn't save her, but I can save you." The honesty of his words struck Eliza deeply, stirring a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She looked out across the prairie again, tears blurring the horizon briefly before she wiped them away. For the first time, she believed survival might lead to something more than just existence. Their fragile peace shattered 3 nights later. Headlights appeared on the distant dirt road long after midnight, cutting through darkness like predatory eyes. Cole saw them first while securing the barn and immediately recognized the aggressive speed of the approaching vehicle. His stomach tightened as he hurried toward the house. Inside, Eliza woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel outside. Terror flooded her instantly, sharper than any pain she had felt before. Cole burst through the door, his voice calm but urgent. "Stay behind me," he said. The engine outside roared to a stop, followed by the slam of a car door. Heavy footsteps approached the porch, each one echoing like a countdown. Eliza's entire body trembled as memories crashed violently into her mind. She clutched the back of a chair, forcing herself to remain upright despite fear threatening to collapse her legs. Cole stepped toward the front door, his posture rigid with protective resolve as a familiar voice called from outside, smooth, cold, and terrifyingly calm. "Eliza, sweetheart, you've caused quite the inconvenience." Victor Hale stepped onto the porch with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. He wore a tailored coat untouched by dust, his polished boots gleaming beneath the porch light. His smile appeared charming at first glance, but his eyes held no warmth, only possession. Cole opened the door halfway, blocking the entrance with his broad frame. "You're trespassing," Cole said evenly. Hale chuckled softly, removing his gloves with slow precision. "I'm retrieving what belongs to me." The words sliced through the night like broken glass. Behind Cole, Eliza's breath trembled violently, but she refused to step back. Hale leaned slightly, trying to see around Cole's shoulder. "Eliza, darling, you've embarrassed me enough. Come home." Silence stretched painfully. Cole didn't move. Eliza's voice emerged from behind him, shaking but determined. "I'm not yours." Hale's expression faltered for a split second before hardening. "You signed contracts, legal, binding agreements." Eliza stepped forward, her hand gripping Cole's arm for support, but her voice growing stronger. "I signed under fear. That isn't consent." The words carried years of suppressed truth, exploding into the night with undeniable force. Hale's charm dissolved completely, replaced by cold fury. "You think this cowboy can protect you?" he sneered. Cole's jaw tightened, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous calm. "You should leave." Hale laughed bitterly. "Or what?" The silence that followed felt electric. Cole stepped forward slightly, his presence alone radiating warning. "Or you'll learn this land doesn't tolerate men who mistake control for love." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Hale's eyes. Sheriff Reeves' truck headlights suddenly appeared behind Hale's car, flooding the yard with bright authority. Reeves stepped out, resting his hand casually near his holster. "Evening, Victor," he called. "Seems you've ignored several legal warnings." Hale glanced between the sheriff and Cole, calculating rapidly. Rage simmered beneath his forced composure, but he stepped back slowly. "This isn't over," he said coldly. Eliza met his gaze, her fear replaced by unwavering strength. "It is for me." Hale stared at her for a long moment before turning sharply and driving away, thus swallowing his retreating vehicle into darkness. Silence settled across the ranch once more. Heavy but victorious, Reeves approached cautiously, scanning the yard, before nodding toward Cole. "You all right?" Cole nodded once. Eliza stepped onto the porch beside him, her shoulders trembling not with fear but release. Years of control, silence, and survival finally collapsed beneath the weight of her own reclaimed voice. Cole glanced down at her, his expression softening. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, illuminated by moonlight and possibility. Eliza inhaled deeply, the cool night air filling her lungs without restriction for the first time in years. She leaned slightly against Cole, not out of weakness, but trust. He rested his hand gently over hers, grounding her in quiet reassurance. The storm that had brought her to the ranch had nearly broken her spirit, but standing beneath the open Wyoming sky, she finally understood something powerful and undeniable. She had not just escaped, she had survived, and now, surrounded by endless land and unwavering protection, she was finally free.